The morning started the way most mornings did at Naval Base Coronado, with the smell of salt air drifting off the Pacific, the distant sound of boots hitting pavement in formation, and the particular kind of quiet that only exists on a military installation before the world fully wakes up. Elena Vasquez stood at her kitchen window with both hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, watching the neighborhood come to life the way she had done nearly every morning for the past 6 years. 2 doors down, Sergeant Carol Diaz was already loading her minivan with grocery bags she had forgot to take in the night before. The Martinez kids were chasing their dog across the lawn in their pajamas. A pair of junior officers jogged past in matching gray shirts, their conversation lost to the wind. It was, by every measure, an ordinary Tuesday. Elena took a long sip of coffee and turned back to the kitchen where her 2 children, Sofia, 9, and Mateo, 6, were arguing over the last of the orange juice with the kind of passionate intensity only siblings understand. She settled the dispute the way she always did, splitting the remainder evenly between 2 glasses and pouring herself a 3rd cup of coffee instead, because this was the quiet tax that mothers paid. "Backpacks," she said. Not a question, not a request, just the word, flat and certain, the way her own drill sergeant had once said things to her a lifetime ago. Both children scrambled. Elena Vasquez had not always been the woman standing in this kitchen, in this neighborhood, on this base. Before Sofia and before Mateo, and before the wedding in San Diego where Marcus had cried and made everyone else cry too, she had been Second Lieutenant Elena Cruz of the United States Marine Corps, a logistics officer with 2 overseas deployments, a commendation for her work during a supply chain crisis in Bahrain, and a reputation among her peers for being the calmest person in any room, regardless of what that room contained. She had left the Corps voluntarily, a decision she had made with clear eyes and no regrets, because Marcus's career required one of them to be stationary, and she had decided it would be her. She did not think of it as a sacrifice. She thought of it as a different kind of service, the kind that involved school pickup and soccer practice, and keeping 2 small human beings alive and emotionally intact, while their father disappeared into classified corners of the world for months at a time. Marcus Vasquez was a Chief Petty Officer in SEAL Team 7. He had been deployed for 11 weeks. Elena did not know where. She never knew where. She had learned to stop trying to guess from the news cycles, because the operations her husband ran were never the ones that made the news. She walked Sofia and Mateo to the base school herself, the same way she did every morning, holding Mateo's hand because he still let her, and knowing the days of that were numbered. The sky above Coronado was the particular shade of blue that made California feel like a promise. The palm trees along the main road stood perfectly still in the absence of wind. Everything looked clean and ordered and safe, the way military installations are designed to look, the aesthetic of control made physical. She kissed both children at the gate, watched them disappear into the flow of other children, and turned back toward home. That was when she noticed the truck. It was a white maintenance vehicle, the kind that appeared on base regularly, emblazoned with contractor logos, driven by civilian workers who serviced the electrical systems or the HVAC units or the endless infrastructure that kept a naval installation functioning. There was nothing visually remarkable about it. It was parked along the service road that ran behind the communications building, maybe 60 yards from where Elena stood, and any other person walking past would have glanced at it and thought nothing. Elena stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at the truck for a long moment, the way she used to stand at the edge of supply manifests and look for the thing that did not belong. The truck had a contractor decal on the door, Meridian Technical Services, blue lettering on white. She had seen that name before. She had seen it on the vehicles that came to service the base's electrical relay systems, usually on Thursdays. It was Tuesday. She also noticed, though she could not have said precisely why it registered, that the truck was parked facing out, Every contractor vehicle she had ever observed on base was parked facing in toward the curb. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that meant nothing or meant everything, and the difference between those two outcomes was everything. She told herself she was being paranoid. She had been doing this for years, seeing patterns in ordinary things, reading threat into routine, the occupational neurosis of a woman who had spent too long in uniform and too long married to a man who operated in the world's darkest corners. She walked home. She made a second pot of coffee she did not need. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop to the half-finished email she was writing to her mother in Tucson. But her eyes kept going to the window. The truck had not moved. At 9:30 a.m., she watched the guard rotation happen at the east checkpoint. Or rather, she watched it not happen. The two-man rotation that should have exchanged at the checkpoint at 9:30 every morning, a rhythm she had observed so many times it had become unconscious wallpaper, did not occur. The guards who should have been relieved stayed at their post. The guards who should have relieved them did not appear. It could have been a scheduling change. It could have been a dozen things. Elena closed her laptop. She went upstairs, opened the closet in the hallway, and took down the green canvas bag from the top shelf, the one Marcus had packed for her 3 deployments ago and made her promise to never unpack. She unzipped it and looked at its contents the way a person looks at a fire extinguisher they hope to never use. Radio, medical kit, 2 boxes of 9mm ammunition, a folding knife, zip ties, a laminated base map. She zipped it back up. She did not take it downstairs. Not yet. She stood at the window and watched the truck and drank her coffee and felt the particular stillness that she recognized from the moments before things went wrong overseas. Not fear exactly, but a heightened quality of attention, the body's own intelligence running ahead of conscious thought, cataloging and assessing and preparing. At 9:44 a.m., a second vehicle appeared on the service road and parked behind the first. A third pulled in 2 minutes later. Elena set down her coffee mug, walked upstairs, and took the green bag off the shelf. She also retrieved the Glock 19 from the biometric safe on Marcus's side of the closet, the one he had installed the week before his last deployment, pressing her palm to the reader until it memorized her hand, telling her with the particular calm of a man who understood real danger that he hoped she never needed it, but that hope was not a plan. She checked the magazine, 17 rounds full, 1 in the chamber. She put the gun in the back of her waistband, pulled her shirt over it, and went back to the window. At 9:47 a.m., the perimeter alarm screamed once, a single sharp wail across the entire base, and then went completely silent. The silence was worse than the alarm. Elena Vasquez picked up the green canvas bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked to her front door. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds, her hand on the doorknob, her eyes closed, running through everything she knew and everything she needed to do. Then she opened the door and stepped outside into the California morning, where the palm trees were still standing perfectly still, and the sky was still impossibly blue, and the world was about to change completely. The silence after the alarm was the kind that'd wait. Elena had experienced it before, not here, not on this quiet residential street lined with base housing and flowering shrubs, but in Bahrain, standing outside a supply depot when the radio traffic suddenly went dead, and every person within earshot had exchanged a look that communicated, without a single word, that something had shifted in the atmosphere of the world around them. She stood on her front porch for 5 seconds and listened. Down the street, Carol Diaz had frozen beside her minivan, one hand still on the door, head tilted up like an animal catching a scent. 2 houses further, Mrs. Park had stepped out onto her porch with a dish towel in her hand, looking toward the eastern perimeter with the uncertain expression of someone who did not know whether to be frightened or wait for an explanation. Elena did not wait for an explanation. She moved off the porch and angled across her lawn at a pace that was not running, but was not walking either. The measured, deliberate movement of someone going somewhere with purpose, but without panic. Because panic was the one thing she could not afford, and the one thing she had learned long ago that she was genuinely capable of suppressing when it mattered. She reached Carol Diaz in 6 seconds. "Carol," her voice was level, a hand on the woman's arm firm enough to pull focus. "Take the kids to your basement right now. Lock the interior door. Don't open it for anyone except me or base security in full uniform with badge verification. Do you understand me?" Carol Diaz was an Army sergeant's wife who had lived on military installations for 14 years. She did not ask questions. She read the expression on Alina's face the way a person reads a weather system, quickly and completely, and she nodded once. "Tyler's already inside. Give me 30 seconds. "You have 20. Carol moved. Alina turned. From where she stood at the edge of Carol's driveway, she had a partial sightline to the eastern perimeter, through a gap between two housing units, past the edge of the motor pool parking area, to the chain-link fence that bordered the installation's boundary. What she saw through that gap made the muscles in her jaw tighten. 3 men in United States Navy working uniforms, the blue digital camouflage pattern of naval working uniforms, the kind worn by hundreds of personnel on this base every day, were moving through a breach in the fence that should not have existed. The breach was clean, not cut in a hurry with bolt cutters, but opened surgically, the links folded back in a way that suggested preparation, reconnaissance, a plan that had been developed over time by people who had studied this installation carefully. They moved the way trained people move, not with the theatrical crouching of action movies, but with the quiet, economical efficiency of individuals who had done this kind of thing before, who understood sightlines and cover and the geometry of moving through a space without being seen. They were not running. They did not need to run. They owned the tempo of the moment, and they knew it. Alina clocked 3 things in rapid succession. First, the 2 guards at Post 7, the eastern checkpoint, were down. One was slumped against the guard station in a way that looked like sleep from a distance, but was not sleep. The other was being dragged behind a parked vehicle by the first of the 3 intruders, handled with quick professional efficiency, out of sightlines, out of the way. Second, each of the 3 men was carrying what appeared at this distance to be M4 carbines, standard issue in appearance, which was the point. And at least one of them had additional equipment on his chest rig that she could not identify from 60 yards, but that did not belong in any standard military loadout she had ever cataloged. Third, they split at the interior of the fence. One moved north toward the communications complex. One moved west toward the motor pool. The third moved south. South was the direction of family housing. South was where Alina was standing. She moved. She did not run toward the man coming south, because that would have placed her directly in his path on open ground with no cover and no advantage. Instead, she moved laterally, cutting west behind the row of housing units, using the buildings themselves as concealment, working the angles the way she had been taught to think about movement in contested spaces. Always between cover, never in the open longer than necessary, every step chosen rather than reflexive. She ducked into the narrow service passage between 2 housing units and pressed herself flat against the exterior wall, controlling her breathing with the conscious deliberateness of someone who knew that breath control was not a metaphor but a physical tool. And she thought. The communications building going dark, the alarm silenced, was consistent with a jamming operation. She pulled her phone from her pocket and confirmed what she already suspected. No signal. Not reduced signal, not spotty coverage, but the absolute flat zero of active electronic jamming, the kind that required specialized equipment and deliberate deployment. These were not opportunistic intruders. This was an operation. She pulled the secondary radio from the green canvas bag. It was an ANPRC 148, a tactical multiband radio that Marcus had sourced through channels she had never asked about and pressed into her hands, with the instruction that it operated on frequencies outside standard base communications infrastructure. At the time she had accepted it, the way she accepted most things Marcus gave her, with complete trust in his understanding of threat environments and zero expectation of ever needing it. She needed it now. She powered it on, set the frequency he had written on a piece of paper she had long ago memorized and then burned as instructed, and began transmitting in the clipped, information-dense cadence of her Marine Corps training. Coordinates. Attacker count 3 confirmed. Direction of movement. Status of Eastern Perimeter Guards 2 down, condition unknown. Status of base communications jammed, apparent professional operation. Request for immediate response. She transmitted for 38 seconds, then she stopped and listened. Static, then faintly beneath the static, the sound of a channel opening. Someone had heard her. She did not wait to find out who. She had done what she could do from a distance. Now there was a man moving south through her neighborhood, toward homes where women and children were waking up to a Tuesday morning, and he had no idea that one of those women was standing 30 feet from his projected path with a loaded Glock and 14 years of accumulated knowledge about how bad days work. Elena Vasquez tightened the strap of the green bag across her chest, checked the position of the Glock at her back, and moved to the edge of the service passage to wait. The footsteps came exactly when she calculated they would. He was good. She would give him that. Most people, even trained people, give themselves away before they intend to. A shadow at the wrong angle, a footfall that breaks rhythm, the particular displacement of air that a moving body creates in a confined space. Elena had spent years learning to read these things, partly from formal training and partly from the education that comes from being married to a man who regularly disappeared into places where being noticed meant being dead. This man gave very little away. His footfalls were measured and light. He moved close to the exterior walls of the buildings, minimizing his silhouette. He paused at corners, a brief one count, before rounding them, a proper technique, the kind that is drilled rather than improvised. But he paused at the wrong corner. He stopped at the east face of the building across from Elena's position, which gave him a sightline to the street and to the front doors of 3 houses. Exactly the sightline a man conducting a systematic sweep would want. What it did not give him was a sightline to the service passage along the west face of the adjacent building, which is where Elena was standing, and this was not luck. She had chosen her position because of this exact geometric reality, standing in the one pocket of the neighborhood's layout that his approach path would leave him blind to. She watched him through the gap between a trash enclosure and the building wall. He was wearing the uniform convincingly. The rank insignia were correct. The boots were the right pattern. From 20 feet in the right light, he would pass a casual inspection. But the rifle's position was wrong, held slightly too high and too ready for someone who was supposed to be on a base in San Diego rather than clearing a contested building in a combat zone. And the equipment on his chest rig, visible now at closer range, included a device she recognized as a signal jammer, compact and civilian grade, which meant the jamming was distributed rather than centralized. They had come prepared for this down to the individual carry level. Professional, thorough, patient. Elena felt no fear. This was not bravado and it was not numbness. It was the particular clarity that had always come to her in high-stakes moments, the same clarity that had allowed her to reroute an entire supply convoy under fire in Bahrain without losing a single vehicle, the same clarity that had allowed her to hold herself completely together every time a black government vehicle pulled up to the curb in someone else's yard, while she stood in her kitchen thanking whatever she believed in that it was not her curb today. She had 8 seconds before he reached the point where his line of sight would expand to include her position. She reviewed her options in the time it takes most people to form a single thought. Engage now from behind with maximum surprise risk. A shot at close quarters in a residential area, potential noise, potential for the radio earpiece she could now see in his left ear to broadcast an alert to the other two before she could neutralize it. Withdraw deeper into the passage and let him pass, risk. He would then be behind her, between her and the children. Draw him to a choke point possible, but required more space than she currently had. She chose none of these. She chose the option that every combat-trained person knows and every civilian finds incomprehensible. The one that requires you to move toward the threat, faster than the threat anticipates, in the brief window before the threat becomes aware of you. She came out of the service passage at a controlled run, covering the distance between them in less than 3 seconds, crossing into his peripheral vision at the last possible moment. Too close for the rifle to be useful, and too fast for the human startle response to complete itself before she was already inside his reach. What followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, and was, by any technical measure, the most efficient 4 seconds of Elena Vasquez's life. She used leverage, physics, and the half-second of absolute confusion on his face to take him from standing to grounded, and when the sequence was complete, he was on his back on the service road with his right arm secured behind him at an angle that communicated very clearly that attempting to free it would result in significant structural damage. She took his earpiece first, then his radio. Then, efficiently, she zip-tied his wrists behind his back using the ties from the green canvas bag, 2 layers, cross-positioned, the way she had learned from Marcus, who had learned from people who did this professionally. She dragged him by his collar through the door of the nearest housing unit, unlocked, as most were during base hours, and secured him to the heavy copper pipe running along the laundry room wall, adding a third zip tie through the pipe loop for what Marcus called insurance. His shoulder was dislocated. She had not been trying to dislocate it, but she had not been trying not to either. He was breathing. He was secured. He was no longer a problem. On his chest, attached to a Velcro strip she almost missed, was a laminated tactical map. She almost left it, then she took it. Standing in a stranger's laundry room, she unfolded the map and looked at it under the fluorescent utility light, and what she saw rearranged every assumption she had been working from in the past 20 minutes. The communications building was marked on the map. The motor pool was marked. Family housing was marked, but these markings were in a secondary color, supportive objectives, distractions, the kind of targets you hit to create noise and draw response while the primary objective happened somewhere else. The primary objective was marked in red. It was a vehicle, an unmarked transport, designated only as Romeo Actual on the map, scheduled. The notation was clear and time-stamped, to depart through the base's secondary vehicle gate at 10:30 a.m., carrying a classified hard drive from the Naval Intelligence Processing Unit that operated out of a building most people on this base believed was a record storage facility. Elena looked at her watch. It was 10:11 a.m. 19 minutes. She folded the map, took the attacker's radio and rifle, and ran. There is a particular experience that Elena had heard Marcus describe once, on a night when he had come home from a deployment and sat for a long time at the kitchen table before speaking, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, and something in his face told her he needed to say something out loud to another human being. He had described the feeling of pursuing a target through a city and realizing, somewhere in the middle of the pursuit, that the target knew he was being followed, and that the entire engagement had reversed itself, and that he was now the one being studied, measured, led. She had filed that story in the place where she kept everything Marcus told her about his work, carefully, completely, with the understanding that she might one day need to know it. She needed to know it now. She was moving west along the service corridor behind the housing row, using the map to guide herself toward the secondary vehicle gate, when she became aware that her movement had been anticipated. Not by the 2 remaining men, she was tracking their radio chatter through the confiscated earpiece, and neither had mentioned her or her position. But the base's physical layout, she now realized, had been studied with enough precision that the map she was holding included notations about the service corridors. Whoever had planned this operation had walked this installation. They had done it as contractors, as delivery workers, as people who did not exist enough to be remembered, and had been present enough to observe everything. The secondary vehicle gate was 300 yards from her current position. The two remaining men were, she estimated, based on the radio traffic she was listening to in the earpiece, approximately 90 seconds from converging on the same gate, approaching from different angles. They were going to intercept Romeo Actual before it left. That had always been the plan. The jamming, the breach at the eastern perimeter, the systematic sweep of family housing. All of it was architecture designed to occupy base security response in the wrong places, while two men with the right equipment waited at the right gate for a vehicle that almost no one on this base knew was coming. She ran through the mathematics as she moved. She was one person. She had a Glock, a confiscated rifle she would rather not fire in a residential base environment, a tactical map, and a radio broadcasting on a frequency that had been picked up by someone she had not yet confirmed. The QRF that should be responding to her signal was, optimistically, 10 to 15 minutes out. Romeo Actual would be at the gate in 18 minutes. The two remaining men would be in position in less than 2. She needed to think differently. She stopped moving. She stood in the service corridor and she thought, the way she had learned to think under pressure, not frantically, not linearly, but in the broad and simultaneous way that good tactical decision-making actually works, holding multiple possibilities at once, running each thread forward to its likely outcome, selecting not the perfect option but the best available option with the highest probability of success given imperfect information. The gate. The vehicle could not leave through the gate if the gate was blocked. And the gate could not be blocked by security that had been drawn to the eastern perimeter. But it could be blocked by something else. She keyed the radio again and transmitted, giving the update, revised target identification. Vehicle designation Romeo Actual secondary vehicle gate, 10:30 departure, 2 remaining hostiles converging. She transmitted it twice, clearly, then moved on because transmission was done and action was what remained. She changed course, heading not toward the gate but toward the vehicle pool adjacent to the intelligence building, the civilian vehicle area where base personnel parked personal cars during duty hours. She was looking for something specific, and she found it in 40 seconds. A dark blue base-issued sedan, keys still in the ignition, belonging to a lieutenant commander whose habit of leaving his car unlocked was, under these circumstances, a gift. She got in. She did not drive toward the gate. She drove to the housing unit where she had left her children, 6 minutes round trip, non-negotiable, because she was willing to risk herself but not her children by omission. She pulled up, went to the basement door of Carol's house, pressed her palm flat against it 3 times and then twice as they had agreed in childhood games that now served an actual purpose, and heard Carol's voice on the other side say, "Green light," in a tone that was frightened but steady. "Stay down until you hear helicopters," Alina said. "Don't open this door for anything else." Mateo's voice from somewhere behind Carol, "Mama." "I'm okay, baby," she said. "I'll be right back." She walked back to the car and did not allow herself to feel anything about those 2 words, "right back," because she could not afford what she would feel if she did. She got in the car, put it in drive, and headed for the secondary gate at a speed that was precise and deliberate, and in the mathematics of what was about to happen, exactly enough. The service road to the secondary vehicle gate ran along the western edge of the base, parallel to the perimeter wall, with a row of mature eucalyptus trees on the interior side that cast long shadows in the late morning light. Alina drove with both hands on the wheel and the confiscated earpiece in her left ear, listening to the clipped communication between the 2 remaining men as they confirmed their positions. They were speaking in what she was now certain was Farsi. Specifically, a Tehran-adjacent dialect she had heard in the Gulf during her second deployment, when her logistics unit had operated alongside intelligence teams monitoring cargo shipping routes. She had not been trained as a translator, but she had listened long enough and carefully enough to catch the shape of it, and she caught enough now to understand the critical exchange. Route is clear. Confirm vehicle status. Vehicle in motion. On schedule 3 minutes. They had someone on the inside, or they had surveillance. Either way, they knew Romeo Actual was moving. She had to be at the gate before the vehicle. She pressed the accelerator to the floor. The eucalyptus trees blurred on her left. Ahead, the secondary vehicle gate appeared, a simple two-barrier system, the kind designed for routine vehicle screening rather than high-security interdiction, with a small guard booth on the right side and a drop-arm barrier on each lane. The guard booth was empty. This was not coincidence. The guard assigned to this post had been among those drawn toward the eastern perimeter when the breach alarm sounded, exactly as planned. Elena pulled the car diagonally across both lanes, blocking the exit entirely, and got out. She had 20 seconds, maybe 30, before Romeo Actual rounded the corner from the intelligence building access road and found its exit blocked. She used those seconds to take up a position behind the heavy concrete base of the gate mechanism, solid cover, good sightline down the approach road from both the north, where the vehicle would come, and the south, where the tree line would provide cover for anyone approaching on foot. She had the Glock in her right hand and the confiscated earpiece pressed to her left ear, and she was, in the most fundamental sense, exactly what the base commander would later call her in his report, the last line of defense. The vehicle came around the corner at 10:28 a.m., 2 minutes ahead of schedule. It was a gray, unmarked Chevy Suburban, moving at the careful speed of a vehicle that did not want to appear hurried. Behind the wheel, she could see the pale face of a young petty officer who was almost certainly not supposed to be involved in any of this, and who had no idea that the exit in front of him was blocked by a car driven there by a woman with a gun. She stepped out from behind the barrier with her left hand raised, palm flat, the universal signal to stop, and her right hand behind her back with the Glock loose in her grip, not pointed at anyone but instantly available. The Suburban stopped. The window came down. The young petty officer, she could see his name taped now, DANIELS, E3 by his collar device, looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has driven into a situation they do not have the briefing material to understand. "Ma'am." "Petty Officer Daniels," she said, and she was aware that her voice was the most controlled thing about this moment. "I need you to step out of this vehicle right now and leave the keys in the ignition. This is not a drill, and I do not have time to explain the full situation to you, but I need you to trust me, and I need you to do it in the next 10 seconds. He looked at her for 3 of those seconds. She did not know what he saw in her face. Whatever it was apparently enough. He got out. "Stay behind the barrier," she told him. "Down low, don't move until you hear helicopters." She heard in the earpiece the voice of the first remaining attacker. "Gate. There is a blockage at the gate." And the voice of the second. "Handle it." She moved the Suburban forward 6 feet, closing the gap more completely, and then she positioned herself between the blocked vehicle and the gate arm, in the narrow corridor of space between the concrete barrier and the gate post, with the eucalyptus trees at her back and the approach road in front of her, and she waited. She did not wait long. The first man came from the north, around the corner of the guard booth, and stopped when he saw her. He had a rifle. She had a pistol. The geometry of the moment was not in her favor in the conventional sense. But she was behind cover and he was in the open, and she had a Glock trained at center mass, and he had a problem he had not planned for. She watched his eyes. She had learned to do this from Marcus, who had told her once that you could read a person's next move in their eyes approximately half a second before their body committed to it. His eyes went to the Suburban, then to her, then to the approach road behind him, calculating. He was calculating whether to engage or withdraw. She made the calculation easier. "Federal charges," she said in English because it was the language she had available. "Both your people are down. The hard drive does not leave this base. Stand down or I will put you down, and I want you to understand that I am not making a threat, I am making a statement of fact." His eyes went to the tree line to her left. She didn't look, she already knew his partner was there. She said, loudly enough to carry, "I've accounted for both of you. Don't make this worse than it already is." 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Then from the distance, faint at first and then impossible to ignore, the sound of a helicopter. The helicopter's sound changed everything. She saw it in the first man's eyes before his body moved, the recalibration that happens when a plan collapses, and the mind scrambles to find an exit that no longer exists. His weight shifted back. His rifle angled down by perhaps 10 degrees, which is not surrender but is the precursor to it, the body's own admission that the equation no longer adds up. Behind her, Petty Officer Daniels had flattened himself against the concrete base of the gate arm, making himself as small as possible, which showed good instincts and possibly some prior training or possibly just the basic animal intelligence of a human being in proximity to people with weapons. The helicopter was a Naval Special Warfare Command asset. She would learn this later, scrambled in response to the Coast Guard cutter that had received her initial transmission, and related up the chain with enough urgency that someone with authority had made a rapid decision. It came in from the northwest, low and fast, an MH-60 with a 4-man element visible in the door. It did not land. It did not need to land. The presence of it, banking hard over the base at 200 feet, was the message. The QRF was not 12 minutes away in a theoretical future. It was here now, overhead, and the 4 men visible in the door were not there for atmosphere. The first attacker lowered his rifle the rest of the way. The second man emerged from the eucalyptus tree line 30 feet to Alina's left with his hands elevated, and his weapon pointed at the ground, the gesture of someone who has run the numbers and arrived at the only rational conclusion. He was older than she had expected, 50s, possibly, with the careful, weathered face of someone who had done this kind of work for a long time, and he looked at her with an expression she could not fully categorize, something between professional assessment and what might, in different circumstances, have been respect. She kept the Glock on him until the helicopter touched down in the open area beyond the gate, and the 4-man element was out and moving. Then she lowered the weapon. She exhaled. It was 10:33 a.m. The hard drive was still in the Suburban, which was still blocking the gate, which was still on the base. Romeo Actual had not moved. The operation that had begun at 9:47 a.m. with a perimeter alarm and ended here, at a secondary vehicle gate with a blocked car and a woman with a Glock, had lasted 46 minutes. The special warfare element secured both men efficiently, and the senior operator, a master chief whose face Alina did not recognize but whose bearing she understood immediately, came to where she was standing and looked at her with the careful eyes of a man processing something that did not fit cleanly into his operational training. "You the one on the secondary frequency?" he asked. "Yes." "Alina Vasquez?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, the particular nod that she recognized as military shorthand for a great many things that would take too long to say. "Your kids are secure," he added. "We sent a team to the housing area." She felt something release in her chest that had been held tight for 46 minutes. "Thank you," she said. He nodded again. Then he went back to work, because there was still work to do, and that is the nature of the profession. The situation resolves and the next situation begins, and there is never quite the time for the feeling of it to fully arrive. Elena sat down on the concrete base of the gate arm, the Glock resting across her knees, and looked up at the sky. The eucalyptus trees swayed. The helicopter circled once and banked south. Petty Officer Daniels was sitting against the barrier 3 feet away from her, still in the position of someone not entirely sure that standing up is safe, and he looked at her with the dazed, recalibrating expression of a person who has just watched something that they know they will spend the rest of their life trying to describe accurately and mostly failing. "Who are you?" he asked. "Elena Vasquez," she said. "Are you?" he started. "I mean, what's your are you security, intelligence?" She considered the question. "I'm a mom," she said. "I live on base." He stared at her. She almost smiled. The official process that followed was long, methodical, and conducted by people who asked the same questions in slightly different ways for several hours in a conference room that smelled of old coffee and institutional carpet. Elena answered everything completely. She had been a Marine officer. She understood that debrief was not an interrogation, but an assembly of information. That the people in the room were trying to reconstruct an event that had happened in real time and needed the full version, not the edited version, not the version shaped by modesty or by the particular social hesitation that made civilians sometimes omit the most critical details, because they did not want to appear to be claiming too much. She claimed everything, every decision, every movement, every calculation. She told them about the truck parked facing out on a Thursday contractor's regular Tuesday schedule. She told them about the guard rotation that did not happen. She told them about the green canvas bag and the biometric safe and the radio frequency that Marcus had made her memorize and burn. She told them about the man in the service corridor and the 4 seconds and the zip ties and the laminated map. She told them about running the numbers on the gate. The investigators, a mix of NCIS agents, naval intelligence officers, and 2 individuals from an agency that presented no identification, and whose questions were more specific and more interesting than anyone else's, listened with the focused attention of professionals hearing testimony they understood the significance of. At one point, one of the unidentified individuals set down his pen and looked at her and said, carefully, "When you made the decision to block the vehicle gate rather than pursue the 2 remaining subjects, what was your reasoning?" Elena thought about this for a moment. "The subjects were mobile and armed, and I was one person," she said. "I couldn't guarantee I could neutralize both before one of them reached the vehicle or the vehicle reached the gate. But I could guarantee that a car blocking a gate was a car blocking a gate. Physics doesn't have a countermove." The man wrote something down and did not ask a follow-up question. The 3 attackers were, by the following day, identified through fingerprints and equipment analysis as members of a foreign intelligence network. Not uniformed military, not state-sanctioned in any way that the relevant government would ever officially acknowledge, but resourced and trained at a level that suggested significant institutional backing. The hard drive they had been attempting to extract contained signals intelligence, data, related to naval operations in a theater that Elena was not briefed on and did not ask about. The 2 guards from Post 7 survived. One had a severe concussion. One had a punctured lung. Both would recover. The 3rd attacker, the one Elena had zip-tied to the laundry room pipe, was in surgery by the time she finished her first cup of debrief coffee. His shoulder required significant reconstruction. He would, according to the medical summary she was later given access to, make a full recovery. She was not certain how she felt about this and decided she felt fine about it. He was alive. The children on this base were alive. The hard drive was in the right hands. These were the relevant outcomes. At the end of the debrief, the base commander, Rear Admiral James Holloway, a man with 32 years of service and a face that looked like it had seen most of what there was to see, sat down across from her and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Vasquez, I've been in uniform since 1994. I have debriefed SEALs, Force Recon Marines, Delta operators, intelligence officers, and combat pilots. What you did today, the observation, the communication, the tactical decision-making under pressure, the management of the gate scenario, is the finest display of situational awareness and improvised tactics I have personally witnessed. Elena looked at him. I was trying to protect my kids, she said. I know, he said. That's what makes it remarkable. The official report that was filed that evening listed her contribution under the bureaucratic heading, Civilian Assist, Material to Mission Success. It was the only language the form had available, and it was, by any measure, the most profound understatement that had been committed to official record at Naval Base Coronado in recent memory. She did not see the report. She was home by then, sitting on the kitchen floor with Sophia pressed against her left side and Mateo pressed against her right, the three of them not saying anything in particular, just being in the same space, which was its own kind of language. 6 weeks later, Marcus Vasquez came home. He came through the front door on a Tuesday morning. The symmetry of this was lost on no one, with a duffel bag over one shoulder and 3 weeks of beard, and the particular quality of exhaustion that belongs exclusively to people who have been operating at the edge of human performance for extended periods, in conditions they will never fully describe. Elena was in the kitchen. The children were at school. She heard the door and she did not move. She stood at the counter with her coffee and she waited. And when Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at her with those dark, careful eyes that she had spent 11 years learning to read, she saw the full sequence of things cross his face: relief, love, the particular joy of homecoming that never diminished no matter how many times he had done it. And then she saw something else. He had read the debrief. She had not known he would be given access to it. She did not know when he had read it, but she could see in his face that he had, and that it had done something to him that she had not quite anticipated, and she did not know, in that moment, how to read what that something was. He set the duffel down in the doorway. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. He sat down at the kitchen table, and he put both hands flat on the surface, and he looked at them. And Elena watched him and said nothing, because she had learned that silence was sometimes the only thing that gave people enough room to arrive at what they needed to say. He sat like that for almost a full minute. Then he looked up at her. The truck, he said. Facing out, she said, on a Thursday contractor's day. He nodded slowly. I taught you that. You taught me a lot of things. He was quiet again. Then the radio frequency. You made me memorize it. The gate. Physics, she said. He looked at her in a way that she had seen him look at very few things in all the years she had known him, with the full weight of recognition, the particular look that belongs to moments when you understand something more completely than you understood it before. I knew, he said quietly, when I married you that you were, I always knew you were stronger than me. That's not true. It's exactly true, he said. I know what I'm doing out there. I've trained for it my entire adult life. I have a team. I have equipment. I have the full institutional weight of the United States Navy behind every operation. You did what you did alone in civilian clothes in a neighborhood for the first time with no backup and no briefing and 2 kids you had to get out of the way first. He shook his head. There's no comparison. Elena looked at her husband. She thought about the 46 minutes, about Sophia's backpack by the front door, about Mateo's voice through the basement door, Mama, and the 2 words she had said that she had meant with every cell in her body and not known in that moment to be guaranteed. She thought about standing at the gate with the Glock across her knees and the eucalyptus trees swaying and the helicopter banking south, and the feeling of something releasing in her chest. She thought about the answer she had given Petty Officer Daniels. I'm a mom, she said. I live on base. Marcus looked at her. Something moved through his expression that was too large for the kitchen to contain. Yeah, he said softly, you do. The children came home at 3:15 p.m. and found their father in the living room and the house filled briefly with the kind of noise and movement that could only be described as complete. The sound of a family reassembled, every missing piece returned, the particular wholeness of people who understand, in a way most people are fortunate enough to never have to understand, that the ordinary Tuesday morning is not ordinary at all. It is everything. 6 months after the events at Naval Base Coronado, a sealed commendation bearing Elena Vasquez's name was added to a file in a building in Washington, D.C. that most people have no reason to know exists. The commendation was classified. It would remain classified for many years. But on the base, the story moved the way real stories move person to person, in the way that truth has always traveled, without documentation and without official sanction, in the voices of people who were there, and people who knew people who were there, and people who simply understood when they heard it, that it was the kind of story that had to be true because nothing else could explain why it felt the way it did. The truck facing out on a Thursday contractor's day. The green canvas bag on the top shelf. The gate. The woman standing behind a blocked car with a Glock and absolutely no intention of moving. They were going to say she was just a wife. Carol Diaz told people, for years afterward, in the particular tone of someone who had been in proximity to something and needed others to fully appreciate it. Just a wife who lived on base. Can you imagine?
Giù, così, così, o là. Si va. Madonna, ma è bellissimo sto livello. Ok. Dicevo, a me fa piacere sapere che ci sono persone che seguono la chat senza dover per forza interagire. È una cosa piacevole. Vuol dire che sto facendo un buon lavoro. Sono contento. L'importante è che vi tenga compagnia. Sono contento di la pianto lì, perché sennò divento noioso. Io ci tengo a queste cose. Mi sembra un po' GLaDOS, non importa. L'importante è andare a casa. Cos'è sto coso? Allora, c'è lo sborrume. Forse è per farlo sbucare da lì? Cosa? Ah. Sì, sì, ok. Arriva già? Cos'è? Granate, ma da quando? Però laggiù non ci posso andare. Ah. No, di qua. Messo bene? Non lo so, scopriamolo. Sì. Perfetto. Finito? Sì. Voilà, voilà. Guarda che bello sto gioco, quanto mi sta piacendo. Ci sto un po' prendendo la mano con... Cioè oramai ci ho preso la mano con il tipo di gioco, con le possibilità che si hanno.